The text of Zunzi. I have found it difficult to glean much about the history of Zunzi's text. The quotations that occur in early authors go to show that the 13 chapters of which Zima Qian speaks were essentially the same as those now extant. We have his word for it that they were widely circulated in his day, and can only regret that he refrained from discussing them on that account. Zun Xing Yan says in his preface, during the Qin and Han dynasties, Zunzi's art of war was in general use amongst military commanders, but they seem to have treated it as a work of mysterious import, and were unwilling to expound it for the benefit of posterity. Thus it came about that Wei Wu was the first to write a commentary on it. As we have already seen, there is no reasonable ground to suppose that Cao Gong tampered with the text. But the text itself is often so obscure, and the number of editions which appeared from that time onward so great, especially during the Tang and Song dynasties, that it would be surprising if numerous corruptions had not managed to creep in. Towards the middle of the Song period, by which time all the chief commentaries of Zunzi were in existence, a certain Ji Tianbao published a work in 15 Jiran entitled Zunzi with the collected commentaries of 10 writers. There was another text with variant readings put forward by Jufu of Daxing, which also had supporters among the scholars of that period, but in the Ming editions, Sun Xing Yan tells us these readings were for some reason or other no longer put into circulation. Thus, until the end of the 18th century, the text in sole possession of the field was one derived from Ji Tianbao's edition, although no actual copy of that important work was known to have survived. That, therefore, is the text of Zunzi, which appears in the war section of the great Imperial Encyclopedia printed in 1726, complete classics collection of ancient China. Another copy at my disposal of what is practically the same text, with slight variations, is that contained in the 11 philosophers of the Zhou and Qing dynasties, 1758. And the Chinese printed in Captain Calthrop's first edition is evidently a similar version which has filtered through Japanese channels. So things remained until Sun Xing Yan, 1752 to 1818, a distinguished antiquarian and classical scholar, who claimed to be an actual descendant of Sun Wu, accidentally discovered a copy of Ji Tianbao's long-lost work, when on a visit to the library of the Huaying Temple. Appended to it was the Yi Shuo of Zhongyuo Xian, mentioned in the Tongzhi, and also believed to have perished. This is what Sun Xing Yan designates as the Gu Bun or Yuan Bun original edition or text, a rather misleading name, for it cannot by any means claim to set before us the text of Zunzi in its pristine purity. Ji Tianbao was a careless compiler, and appears to have been content to reproduce the somewhat debased version current in his day, without troubling to collate it with the earliest editions then available. Fortunately, 2 versions of Zunzi, even older than the newly discovered work, were still extant, one buried in the Tongdian, Du You's great treatise on the Constitution, the other similarly enshrined in the readings of the Taiping era encyclopedia. In both the complete text is to be found, though split up into fragments, intermixed with other matter, and scattered piecemeal over a number of different sections. Considering that the readings takes us back to the year 983, and the Tongdian about 200 years further still, to the middle of the Tang dynasty, the value of these early transcripts of Zunzi can hardly be overestimated. Yet the idea of utilizing them does not seem to have occurred to anyone until Sun Xingyan, acting under government instructions, undertook a thorough recension of the text. This is his own account. Because of the numerous mistakes in the text of Zunzi which his editors had handed down, the government ordered that the ancient edition of Ji Jianbao should be used, and that the text should be revised and corrected throughout. It happened that Wu Nianhu, the governor of Biguo, and Shi, a graduate of the second degree, had all devoted themselves to this study, probably surpassing me therein. Accordingly, I have had the whole work cut on blocks as a textbook for military men. The three individuals here referred to had evidently been occupied on the text of Zunzi prior to Sun Xingyan's commission, but we are left in doubt as to the work they really accomplished. At any rate, the new edition, when ultimately produced, appeared in the names of Sun Xingyan and only one co-editor, Wu Runji. They took the original edition as their basis, and by careful comparison with older versions, as well as the extant commentaries and other sources of information such as the Yi Shuo, succeeded in restoring a very large number of doubtful passages, and turned out, on the whole, what must be accepted as the closest approximation we are ever likely to get to Sun Tzu's original work. This is what will hereafter be denominated the standard text. The copy which I have used belongs to a reissue dated 1877. It is in 6 bun, forming part of a well-printed set of 23 early philosophical works in 83 bun. It opens with a preface by Sun Xingyan, largely quoted in this introduction, vindicating the traditional view of Zunzi's life and performances, and summing up in remarkably concise fashion the evidence in its favor. This is followed by Cao Gong's preface to his edition, and the biography of Zunzi from the records of the Grand Historian, both translated above. Then come, firstly, Zheng Yuo Xian's Yi Shuo, with author's preface, and next a short miscellany of historical and bibliographical information entitled Zunzi Shu Lu, compiled by BCE Shun. As regards the body of the work, each separate sentence is followed by a note on the text, if required, and then by the various commentaries appertaining to it, arranged in chronological order. These we shall now proceed to discuss briefly, one by one.